still vertical here in the trunk. And she's going to go ahead and bring her arms up to kind of a midpoint in what would be a curl. So she's going to maintain a position of elbow flexion where the forearms are parallel to the ground. And then she's got her palms down, so she's prepared to resist wrist extension. So bringing the wrist into extension is what's being resisted here. We're using the platform pulleys in probably one of the middle two settings. Not the narrowest, not the widest. But you can experiment with that a little bit. And she could do this not only at the same time, she can alternate and all that good stuff. And a lot of people say, well, why would I even want to do such a little thing? This is not going to help me burn fat. This is not going to help me get in great shape or anything. But I got to tell you, I've met so many people over the years that due to weakness and inability to control wrist and that kind of things, they end up with a variety of ailments from carpal tunnel to tendonitis in the elbow that's often called tennis elbow. And these things really can make a difference in the prevention of some of those ailments. Now, if you're going to use these as part of the rehab for one of those problems, you really need to go back and consult a doctor, physical therapist, and those kinds of people, because this may be a little too advanced depending on the stage of rehabilitation you are with those ailments. But the nice little thing that we can do is simply change the position to a palm up, and now we have resisted flexion of the wrist on both sides. Now the key here is always going to be holding this part steady, and that may actually create some challenge up in here. As you can see all these elbow flexors working. But if she was letting all this forearm stuff move around all at the same time, she would be decreasing the optimal performance of the muscle she's really trying to work. So go real light and pay attention to what you're trying to accomplish. This is called the resisted dip, and where the name comes from is the old dip bars that we had in the gyms and at schools and that kind of thing, where someone would jump onto the bar and lift their entire body weight between these two handles. Well, we can simulate that on the bowflex, but the nice thing is we don't have to use our whole body weight. We can work up to that by incrementally adding power rods. So the key here is going to be getting into position. Amy's going to end up being with her hips against the pad, but not leaning against the pad with her torso. And notice how she just grabs the handles from above and then kind of rotates them into position down here. Now, you may find that the easiest way for you to get in position is actually to try that adjustable webbing strap that we use so commonly for squats and things. This could be another use of it, where you put it up here, and by extending it, it'll bring the handle down closer to where you could just maybe grab it from here. So play around with that nice adjustable tool that comes with your bowflex xtreme2. So her goal here is to maintain position of the body and slowly let her elbows bend backwards. Now she needs to control this motion, and she's stopping with about 50 degrees of extension occurring. A lot of times people think that more is better in terms of range of motion, and that is not at all true, because this weight, and especially if you had more weight on there, would try to pull you into even more extension where your shoulders were coming way up. And your shoulder joint does have limitations. So you need to make sure that you're not just trying to rip your shoulder apart in an attempt to perform some exercise. Control it, and then control the push right straight back down to where arm is in a perfectly straight line again. But the important part of this is controlling that top part, and you might not be able to move as far as Amy. She's got tremendous range. She's not violating her own shoulder range though. She's not going to an extreme. You may only be able to move this far. And if that's the case, you might actually push a little bit forward on this exercise and end up out here a little bit to even allow any motion at all, because if she couldn't lift her elbows very far up behind her, she'd have to move more forward in order to get anything out of it. And again, we could do the alternating movements with this because we have two separate cables. We have all those options on a bowflex. Let's take a look at a crunch, a resisted crunch for the abdominals. Now it's going to be in the seated position, and you're going to use the crossbar pulleys for this that I would move in all the way to the narrow position. Now, you're going to need to take a look at a variety of seat heights and see what you think is the most beneficial for you. Because as you adjust the seat height, not only will it change your relationship to the resistance in the pulleys, it also changes your relationship to the back pad. You'll notice the back pad has a little curve to it down there, and that may change how it feels against your spine. So take a look at that, and we've kind of decided for Amy that this was going to be perfect for her. And then she can go ahead and grab the pulley on that side and just curl it right in. And I'll help her with that one. Now she can just bring those across her chest and let them rest on her shoulders. She could, if some people are more comfortable holding it with opposite hands, but this is a pretty easy way to get in position right here. Now, choose a weight that's going to allow you to perform a perfect crunch. And realize a crunch is not like a sit-up. In other words, we're not asking her to move at her hips all the way out to her knees like that. Her pelvis will not move. In fact, in her head, what she's thinking is not so much move forward against the weight, but this. Think about taking her rib cage towards her pelvis. And that's what happens when your spine bends. And that's what all these muscles are trying to do. And many times you'll hear on TV, especially on infomercials, where they'll talk about, oh, you're working upper abs or lower abs or obliques all separately. It is impossible. When you are performing this, your brain is bringing in or employing every muscle that can perform spinal flexion. And folks, that is upper and lower rectus, as well as the obliques on both sides. So don't worry about trying to target things. Worry about doing it correctly, which is thinking about exactly what she's doing. Watch this move straight down to the pelvis, and that's all she's concerned about. And the resistance is key. A lot of people think, oh, I don't want to use resistance on this. It's going to give me a big stomach like a big muscle. It's not the way it works, folks. When you have resistance, you end up with muscles like Amy's got here, these little rows of muscles. That's what matters. Now, if you want to get rid of fat around the middle, which is an important part, that's going to come from diet. That's going to come from other activities that burn calories. This is important for building the muscle. It's not only key to looks for some people, to aesthetics, but also key to help to support your spine for all the other exercises you're going to do. This version of a crunch has historically been called an oblique crunch. And that leads people to believe that the only thing that's working are the oblique muscles, the ones on the sides. And that's not exactly true, because your entire rectus is working. There's no way to get it out of the picture. Your upper and lower rectus, these muscles that run up and down the middle that create this thing called a six-pack, those are working also. It's just that the motion is more oblique. Oblique simply means diagonal. So the motion is a crunch performed at a diagonal, and that's a much more accurate way to envision the name here. Now we're going to use resistance only from one side, and Josh is going to reach across his body and grab it. And notice I have very specifically chosen this setting that's almost the narrowest, and you could try the narrow one if you wanted to, but as strong as he is, he's going to get a little more resistance by changing the angle of resistance, and that's an important thing to learn about bowflex, and all these angles we can change by the pulleys. If you want to alter the way it feels and alter the amount of resistance, you don't have to just run back here and add power rods. Very many times, changing the angle relative to the body or the plane of motion will completely change the amount of resistance you're having to fight. So this is that second hole from the narrowest. And then he's just letting this rest across his chest here. And the motion is going to be, as I mentioned, in a diagonal. But it's still a crunch. He's not moving away. He's not moving his whole body away from that back pad. Can you see that? He's really concentrating not so much on, gosh, I got to tug on the weight or I got to move the weight. He's thinking, what am I moving the weight with? What is going on right here? And he's tightening and thinking about taking this part of the rib cage over to this other side so that the movement is about the contraction and release of what's going on in here. And you can see that his rectus is working. To say that this is not working would just be ludicrous. But at the same time, you can see a lot that's going on over here. And all these muscles were involved in a regular crunch. This is just a wonderful variation for creating a little more specificity, not only within a motion, but within contributions of muscular effort. This is not spot reducing. You cannot do this to get rid of love handles as much as the world would like you to believe that. You've got to watch what you eat. You've got to burn calories as well as build muscle if you want to get to where you can see these great muscles you're working on here. Of all the trunk exercises, they're all incredibly valuable. They're all incredibly important, but some would argue that this is the most important, looking at trunk rotation and all the variations that we can create, especially here on the bowflex. So we're going to have you do this exercise in a standing position, facing one side. And I've got the pulley right here, and you could try various pulley positions. I've got it the second from the narrowest position. And we're going to grab with both hands. In the first version of this, I'm going to ask Josh to bring his arms to his sides, because the further you hold the weight away from you, the heavier that weight is going to feel to you. So we're going to start with his arms by his side, and it's a real simple little trunk rotation, and he's even going to try to keep his legs and pelvis from turning. So all of the motion, which will now be pretty short because of a short range, because I've eliminated all this down here, but it's all in the trunk and spine, okay? And he's not trying to push with his hands or anything else. They only move as far as his trunk will let him move. Now we can immediately make that harder as he gets more advanced by straightening his arms a little bit. Doesn't that feel harder?
Oh, yeah.
Because just holding it, and you know this already, you know that if you hold a weight out here versus hold it in here, weight gets harder the further it is. So right off the bat, he didn't have to go change the power rods. He used mechanics and levers to make this a little bit harder. And he's not just doing an arm thing, he's doing it with the trunk. The arms never move any further than what the trunk can. And he could even alter, he could choose a new starting position where he's pointing off at a diagonal to start with, which would change the range through which he's able to work, because now you can see that he can, instead of going from neutral into the turn, he can start from a turn and come back to neutral. Can you see that? So that's a nice little complementary adjustment right there that can be made. And then the next thing we can do is incorporate some of the lower extremity rotation with it. So you'll notice he's able to turn further because it's not just trunk this time. He's incorporating some of the lower extremity. So these are all very different things, but the big point is he understands the control, and he's not going fast, and he can manipulate. He can say, on this one I'm moving the legs, on this one I'm not. If you're going fast and flying through it, there's going to be 100 things happen that you're not even aware of. So take the time to get control over this, and I'll show you a wonderful change in the motion. Notice the pulley is a little bit lower than his hands. Let's move at the angle of the cable and the pulley, up at an angle. Now this is great because not only is he using every muscle in his body that rotates his trunk, but there's a little trunk extension involved in that too. And these combinations of motions can be among the most important for everything surrounding your spine, not only to look better and to feel better, but to protect the spine and make it so that you can potentially be injury-free in your spinal area throughout your entire life. If you have any back problems with any of these exercises, but especially the trunk exercises, you'll either need to modify what you do or stay away from it entirely or get the advice of someone who's an expert in creating exercises around a back problem. So be concerned about that. Again, none of these are spot reducing. This is about strengthening and control over motion. Let's take a look at the leg extension, which of course is going to use the leg attachment. And the first thing to be concerned with is how you put it in there. So review that section at the very, very beginning of this tape or DVD. And next is, once you put it in there, there are multiple holes inside of this thing or settings that will totally determine whether it's going to line up with your knee correctly or not. So the first thing to notice is that if this thing is out too far, you'll recognize that by the fact that when you wrap your legs around here, around the top pad, and put them under the bottom one, and it seats you back against here where your calf is smashed against this pad, as you can see right here. Well, if it's too far forward, then you may not be able to get your bottom all the way back where you want it and be able to lean back against the pad, the backrest, without kind of reclining. So you could move it backwards a little bit to try to get more comfortable. The thing that's probably of greater concern is if you have it positioned in a setting that's too far back for your femur length or your thigh length. That could be a problem, and the way you'll see that, there's two ways. First of all, if it's too far back, then when you sit down and you're against the back pad and you put your legs around the top pad and under the bottom one, then your knee is going to stick way out front. In fact, your calf may not even touch this thigh pad. And if your calf can't touch it because your femur, your knee is sticking out so far, then we need to readjust this. The other thing you'll notice once you start the exercise, go ahead and straighten out, Josh. Notice when Josh performs this, that the geometry of this leg attachment was designed ideally so that when you're lined up perfectly, go up and down for me. Notice that this pad on his ankles, can you guys see that? This pad on the ankles does not roll up and down his shin as he performs the exercise. Well, if this was positioned incorrectly and it was too far back, you would probably find this pad rolling up maybe a half an inch or even an inch from its original starting place on his ankle or on his shin. So if you can detect either one of those things, you need to make an adjustment before you ever really do the exercise with a significant load or a challenging weight. Now, once you've got that set, there's one more setting. This lower pad, go ahead and rest there for a minute, Josh. This lower pad has 3 holes of adjustment, and you can put it in here, you know, if he was a little bit shorter in the lower leg. There's a longer position. If you're unsure about which one to use, maybe you should use the default position of always putting it in the shorter one. And I say that because regardless of your leg length, the lower one may end up being better for most people's knees because of the forces and how it alters them on the knee. So you can put it in a different place if you think it's more comfortable. But if you're unsure, always err on the side of putting it in the one that's closest to the axis here. All right, now, actual performance. Setting up your body. Josh has done a really good thing right here in that his kneecap is right on top. Straighten out for a second for me, Josh, and hold it. Sometimes people sit on this machine and they roll to the outside. And you'll notice that their kneecap, if you look down from the top, maybe you can see here well, is that I can see more knee on the inside than I can the outside. And what we want to do is roll it so the patella or the kneecap is right smack dab on top of there. You can see the same amount of knee on both sides of it, and then you got to keep it there the whole time. After that, you're pretty much ready to go. Keep it there the whole time. Now the key to this is not just kicking. I've seen so many people think that they're playing soccer or something on this, and they're just abrupt and throwing and launching and kicking the whole thing. Be slow, be intent, and start by tightening here. And think about tightening this hard enough to make extension occur. Now, I would advise most of you, if it doesn't cause any discomfort, go ahead and go to full extension, because this direction of resistance is not forcing you into extension, it's trying to force you away from extension. So you can go all the way to a full contraction here if it's comfortable. If you feel anything funny in your knees, you should stop, as we've mentioned on every exercise. And some of you will occasionally feel grinding and that kind of thing in your knee. Well, folks, that's the beginning of arthritis, and it happens in virtually all of us by a certain age. And so try to position yourself in a way, use a weight that minimizes the amount of grinding and that kind of thing you hear. And you also may want to consult a physician if that's really bothering you a lot. Okay, not just pain, but also the noises you hear sometimes in your knees. But anyway, this is a great exercise. It will not necessarily help you lose fat from your thighs any more than any other exercise will. But building this muscle is going to be incredibly important, and it's a great adjunct to some of the other leg exercises that are available on this DVD. Now the squat is a complicated exercise, so pay close attention because there's an awful lot of things to look at. It's a great exercise though, so in the end it'll be worth it. Now we're going to start, I've got the webbing, the adjustable straps on here, because that's going to allow us to adjust the range at which, not only at which Josh can move, but also the ease with which he can get under this thing. So right now I've got them set to their greatest length, and that'll allow him to get under it pretty easy, because we're going to make some decisions before we put a really challenging weight on here. We're going to want to find out, you're going to want to find out how deep you can go in the squat, the range of motion. And like every range of motion, make that progressive. Please don't just assume, oh, I've done squats my whole life, so I know I can go to a certain depth. This is different. The resistance on here feels different. The bar may even feel different. Please back off and learn everything as if you'd never done it before. It's the only way to make everything incredibly safe, all right? So, his positions, when he ends up doing this squat, he's going to have the bar up high, and he's got his hands, and that's going to be there's different positions of the hands for everybody based upon your shoulder range of motion. He probably, with his range, could actually grab a little narrower. Most of you, unless you absolutely have to grab way out here, I'm not sure I would. I think having a little closer in grip with your hands is going to allow you to keep your shoulder blades closer together rather than being out wide and all protracted and spread out. His spinal position is the key. Positions are always the key. Positions are more important than the actual motions. And the spinal position and not letting his spine flex is going to be really important. All right. Now, the squatting motion itself is going to be performed, and we're going to do it without even any weight on it yet, by having his bottom stick out. His knees are going to go slightly forward, and his chest or rib cage stays virtually up and out. You need to practice that over and over and over. Now, what we can do is slowly have him lower, and I'm going to take up the slack, and you can either get some help or